Hi, my name's Patel, and today I'll be talking about brain damage and how it affects your life. Today, let's start off with a story. There's a guy by the name of Russell Allen, and he was a football player for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He hit his head during a game, and he got a stroke, which I'll talk about what that is later, and didn't realize it. He told his teammates after the game they had a slight headache. The teammates told him just to check with the doctor and see if he was okay. He went to go check with the doctor, and the doctor said, "Let's take an MRI of your brain." Well, basically, what an MRI is where they use magnetic pulses and they check tissue and the inside of your body. The next day, he was notified by the doctor that half of his brain was damaged and it wasn't working because stroke and a lot of other significant reasons. So this is a brain. And the brain is made up of a bunch of Ds. These are neurons. And this is typically what a neuron looks like. So it has dendrite, it has a cell body, and it has an axon. So typically what happens is one of the neurons will send an electrical pulse from the brain down through the dendrite from another one. So it'll go through the dendrite to the nucleus, and the nucleus will say, "Where should I put this?" And then the nucleus will send the electrical pulse down the axon into another dendrite of another neuron. So if I were to clench my fist, my neurons would be sending electrical pulse through other dendrites, through other axons, down to my fist, down to my fingers, to clench together, like that. So now let's talk about the brain, what neurons make. So let's talk about what controls what and what parts of the brain control stuff. So the frontal lobe, it's the motor control. So as I said earlier, if I were to clench my fist, the frontal lobe would be controlling that. Problem solving. So if I was trying to solve a problem or somebody was in an argument, I would use my frontal lobe to think about what can I do to solve this problem. And also speech production. So as Nada said earlier in her TED Talk that words have power, well, all those words are generated in the frontal lobe. Next, the temporal lobe. It's auditory processing, which auditory means hearing and processing means understanding. So you understand what people are saying. Also, language comprehension, which is basically the same thing as auditory processing, besides for language altogether. And then memory and information retrieval, which is kind of like files. You're looking through stuff that might have happened last week or last month or last year. It remembers stuff. And then the brainstem. So involuntary responses, which basically means reflexes. So I automatically know that I have to breathe to stay alive. Or I automatically know that my heart has to pump to stay alive. Reflexes. Cerebellum, balance and coordination. So earlier I was talking about Russell Allen. He hurt his cerebellum and he was banned from the league because you need coordination and you need balance to play football. So if you injure that, then those might not happen and you could get injured even worse. Now the occipital lobe, which is sight. So looking is basically what sight is. And then visual reception and interpretation. Basically means understanding what you're seeing. So if I know that says STEM back there, and I know that says FIC right there. And next, the parietal lobe, which is the touch perception. So I know what I'm touching, and I know how it feels. Also, body orientation and sensory discrimination. So if I was leaning sideways, I know I'm leaning sideways because of my body orientation and what the parietal lobe does. Lets me understand. Also, sensory discrimination. I know the difference between soft and hard, wet and dry. So let's talk about three different brain functions. First, let's talk about stroke. Well, what is stroke? When the brain dies or gets damaged. Why does stroke happen? Because it does not get enough blood. There's three types of strokes. Hemorrhagic, ischemic, and atherosclerosis. Let's talk about hemorrhagic stroke. Well, hemorrhagic stroke is where a vessel inside of your brain splits open and the blood kind of gets leaked out. This can cause brain tissue to get damaged and many other things. Next is to talk about ischemic. Ischemic is where blood clottage gets clotted in the vessel of your brain, and it can. So if all the other individual blood cells gets clotted up right there, it won't be distributed evenly throughout the brain. Next, atherosclerosis. That's where plaque gets built up inside of the vessel and it narrows down so the blood won't be able to travel through. Now let's talk about concussions. Well, concussion is basically where your head rocks back and forth on the back and front of your brain. So you can see by contact, he made his spine go back and forth, his neck back and forth, and his brain's rocking back and forth in a skull. So that can damage neurons or even damage brain tissue when it's pounding against your skull. And the skull is a very, very hard bone. Let's look at a durometer. Well, here's the scalp. Here's the skull. Here's this tissue right here. Here's the tissue again. Here's a softer bit of a tissue, and here's a very soft layer. Well, if you looked at it, the brain is very compact. So if your hand was to swell, it would get bigger. But what if your brain needs to swell? It can't swell because it would just be pushing against the skull and all these layers right here. That can damage brain tissue and neurons. Let's look about the causes of why brain injuries happen. Well, falls are 40% of why brain injuries happen. Assault, 10% of why. Motor vehicles such as motorcycles or cars, 14%. Struck by or against something, getting hit, is 15%. And other is 19%. To look at other, there's 3% of it is bicycle injuries, and that can affect the brain. So when one of your parents says, wear a helmet when you're riding your bike, now you know why, because 3% of the injuries come from bicycle crashes. So this is a graph of what you think about and what you're focused on normally, right here. That's the typical one, and this is the one where trauma is happening. So the typical one, you're mostly engaged in cognition, which is basically learning and comprehending stuff. Next one is social interaction. So if I was talking to somebody, that's what I've been worrying about, and emotional, what I'm feeling right now. And then regulation is my body working, and survival is, am I alive? So when you hurt your brain, it switches around, and you're worried about the opposite things. So survival, you're worried, am I alive? Or regulation, is my body working? Is my heart beating? Am I breathing? And then you don't really think about social and cognition as much when you're hurt. So, as I said earlier, the brain controls us, right? And it helps us stay alive. So, if we damage it, it can really hurt us. So, these are 3 websites that you can go to help the study of the brain and the study of protecting the brain, which is BIUSA. Sorry, guys.
It's okay.
First, www.biusa.org. This stands for the Brain Injury Association of America. And you can donate. You can also learn about brain injuries. You can see what the professionals have to say about the brain. Also, spinalcord.com, where you can also learn about the spinal cord, which is also a big part of your body. Also brain injuries, and you could contact them and talk with them and maybe even donate. And then finally, braintrauma.org. You can donate. You can learn about concussions. I found this a very good use of information when I was doing my research on concussions. And then also you can donate and help. You can also look about what they're researching and a lot of stuff like that. Oops. Going backwards. Okay, so my TED Talk was about brain injury and how it can affect your life. So this quote kind of told me about what the answer to the question is. So brain injury is a puzzle. All the pieces are there, but in the wrong order. Thanks for listening.